chart rows 22, 24, 26 and 28, the beads are hooked in on wrong side rows. You can use either a crochet hook, a fine crochet hook, to do this, or you can use dental floss or fine wire. I much prefer using the floss, but I'm going to show you both techniques, first of all with the floss and then with the crochet hook. If you use dental floss, you need to ideally use the Oral-B Super Floss because it has a stiffer end, and this is the end that I snip off, discarding the rest of the floss. I like to bend this short piece of floss in two, so it's got a bend in the centre. And then I'm going to use that to hook in beads. So if I go to my sample, I'm ready now to begin chart row 22, a wrong side row. So there are 6 stitches that are purled first of all. Okay, then I'm ready to hook in my first bead. So using the floss, I slip the floss down purlwise through the middle of the stitch so it comes out the other side, and then I pull the end through and draw both ends of the floss together. Then I take the first bead, it's a gold bead first of all. So I take one gold bead and I pop the gold bead onto the 2 ends of the thread, push the bead down the thread, lift the stitch off the needle very carefully so then I can push the bead down onto the stitch, dragging that stitch through the middle of the bead, and then very carefully I slip the stitch onto the left hand needle, remove the floss and then purl the stitch. Pull tightly and the bead will be hooked onto the stitch. I'm then going to work 7 stitches until I come to the next place to hook in a bead. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that again with the floss. So you poke the floss down through the stitch, bring the 2 ends together. Next it's a lipstick bead. Poke both ends through the lipstick bead. Gently pull the stitch off the left hand needle, push the bead onto the stitch, put that stitch back onto left hand needle, remove the floss and purl that stitch. I pull quite tightly after I've hooked in the stitch and on the stitch after, just to make sure that's as neat as possible. And then I'm going to work across to my 3rd bead on this row, which is another gold bead. This time I'm going to use the crochet hook. So what you need to do first of all is to put 1 bead in the correct colour onto the crochet hook. You then put the hook down through the middle of the stitch and you drag the stitch through the middle of the bead and then pop the stitch back onto the left hand needle, making sure that it's not split, and then you purl. We're purling because it's a wrong side row. I'm going to demonstrate that once more. Okay, this time it's a velvet bead. So you hook the bead onto the crochet hook. You put the crochet hook down through, cleanly through the middle of the stitch on the left hand needle and drag the stitch off the needle so it's on the hook. and then you drag the stitch through the bead, pop the stitch back onto left hand needle so it's not split, and then pull firmly on that yarn to make sure that bead is as neat as possible, and then continue to the next bead. I'm going to do my last bead of this row with the floss. The row's completed, and if we turn the work round so the right side is facing, you can see that the beads are all hooked in.